What is colorism and where does it come from? Racism relies on the belief that some races are better than others. Colorism is the idea that within races, lighter is better. Whereas racism divides people into discrete categories and judges them on that basis, colorism differentiates within a racial group based on a continuum from light to dark. Colorism is prevalent not only in the United States, but around the globe. In the United States, colorism has existed since the colonial era. The Africans who were brought to the North American colonies as slaves were primarily dark-skinned. Many of these Africans had sexual relations with Europeans, sometimes of their free will, sometimes through coercion, and sometimes through rape. These relations led to a new class of mixed-race people, known as mulattoes. During the era of slavery, lighter-skinned slaves sometimes received preferential treatment. They were more likely to work in the house instead of the fields, to be taught to read, and to be freed. Some former slaves became part of a small class of freedmen who eventually formed the core of the Black elite in the United States. In Latin America, skin color stratification has also existed for centuries. Spanish colonizers developed an elaborate system of ancestry-based castas or castes, which determined social and legal ranking. By the end of the colonial period in 1821, this system encompassed over 100 categories. More Spanish ancestry generally meant both lighter skin and more prestige. These categories are no longer used in Latin America, but the inequities that stem from them persist. The preference for light skin in the Americas seems to have its roots in colonization. In comparison, Asia has a longer history of colorism, one that predates colonialism. As early as the late 9th century, the ancient Sanskrit text Ramayana featured light skin as ideal. Women studies scholar Ayu Saraswati explains that in both the Indian and Indonesian's version of this text, beautiful women are described as having white faces that shine like the moon. In Indonesia, colonialism reinforced this preference for light skin. 19th century Dutch colonial authorities granted preferential treatment to persons of mixed Dutch-Indonesian ancestry. When the Japanese became the colonial power in Indonesia in 1942, they also privileged those with lighter skin. The Japanese have long privileged light skin, as darker skin is associated with the laboring classes whose work inhibits their ability to avoid sun exposure. Contemporary advertising has strengthened the idea that light is better, as blue-eyed blondes dominate magazine and billboard images in Indonesia. What about preferences on the continent of Africa, where there's great diversity in skin shades? Anthropologist Peter Frost found some evidence that a preference for lighter skin may have predated colonialism in Africa. For example, in the pre-colonial era, the languages of many tribes included value-laden terms that distinguished between skin colors. The question of whether and how African colorism predates colonialism remains unsolved, but it's clear that the favoring of light skin became more entrenched during the colonial era. What about in your community? Have you noticed a preference for lighter or darker skin tones? Where do you think these ideas come from?